The radio in my basement wasn't on when the voice came through. No dial glowed, no tubes warmed, no switch had been thrown. Still from the dark speaker, a young woman's breath threaded the silence and shaped a single word I had not heard in 12 years, the way only one person ever said it. Mom. Tell me where you're listening from and tap subscribe if you think every buried truth deserves daylight. I used to measure time by the sound of our house. In the mornings, the kettle's small whine at 6:15. The dryer thumping a load of towels I always forgot to fold. The garage door rising with a rusty sigh while the sun pushed up over the ridge and caught the frost on our front steps, turning it silver. Copper Ridge sits at a bend in the mountain highway where the pine stands are tight and the wind carries wood smoke straight across the valley. Folks here greet you by name in the hardware aisle and tell you how many inches fell last storm without checking the weather report. It isn't paradise nothing honest is, but it's the kind of place where porch lights mean welcome and worry wears a familiar face. In 2013, early fall came on like it always did, mornings in the high 40s, afternoons pushing 68 when the sun cleared the line of lodge poles. I worked out of the basement taking in busted lamps and old radios from people who hated to throw away something that still had a little song left in it. Some afternoons I drove out to job sites replacing panels in century-old houses, fishing wire through walls that had seen more winters than I had. I kept the receipts in a coffee can and the schedule in my head. If it got really busy, I wrote appointments on masking tape and stuck them to the side of the fridge. I wasn't fancy, but our lights stayed on, and when I turned the oven to 350, it listened. My daughter Amelia loved her routines like I do. She was 13 that September, tall for her age, all elbows and sudden laughter. She kept her sketchbook by the front door, pencils tucked into the spiral like arrows. On school days, she rode in with me the first 3 miles, then hopped out where the shoulder widens by the old mule barn. We'd part there her to the bus stop, me to a ranch house or a store that needed a ballast. 2 steps shoulder check, eyes up I'd call, and she'd give me a mock salute. We had a handshake too quick and complicated, full of claps and snaps that never made sense to anyone else. It looked like we were catching something in the air and setting it gently between us. She collected small things, pressed ferns, flattened pennies from the tourist machine down in Idaho Springs, an old charm bracelet from a yard sale with 3 little danglers, a book, a cat, and a crescent moon. A story, she said, tapping each one. Words, a friend, and the night where magic hides. She kept that bracelet on a nail by her bed at night because the clasp stuck sometimes and pinched her wrist. On hikes, she'd string ribbons along branches so we could find our way back if a trail ran thin. Breadcrumbs, she'd tell me. Even Hansel and Gretel knew a map looks different in the dark. Maya came up every other weekend in a gray Jeep that had more miles than fear. She calls herself an audio engineer, which in our family translates to smart with wires and stubborn with standards. She and I grew up in a house where you fixed what you could and lived with what you couldn't, so sound had always been her language. She brought gadgets, tiny tuners no bigger than a matchbox, a laptop with the cracked hinge cables coiled like sleeping snakes. She teased me about sticking with the old stuffed glass tubes and dials that needed a gentle hand. "You're a farmer," she'd grin, raising radios like potatoes. I'd smack her arm with a dish towel and tell her to check the ground on my Kenwood before she lectured me about the future. On Sundays, we walked the loop behind our house 1/2 mile to the creek and back. Amelia tossed pebbles from the footbridge and named each splash. She had a talent for paying attention to nothing in particular. "That's the point, Mom," she said once when I told her we were running late. "If you don't notice the small things, the big ones sneak up, dressed like trees." She was 13 and already said things that made me quiet inside. The town's rhythm lives in small Mark's coffee at Murphy's by 7 mailboxes clicked shut by noon, the high school band practicing scales that float thin as floss across the football field around 4. Sheriff's cars idle near the diner long enough for deputies to trade gossip and pie. By dusk, you can count the lit windows on our street and know which neighbors are home without knocking. Around here, trust isn't a slogan. It's the sound of your back gate latch closing exactly the way it always does. Our house has a low roof and a deep porch built in 1972 by folks who believed in plywood and possibility. The basement is where I keep my workbench. The air down there carries a permanent hint of solder and warm dust, like a pocket where coins have lived for years. The Kenwood sits near the cinder block wall, its faceplate scrubbed clean of grime, its meter needle with just enough swing to prove it still has a heart. On quiet nights, when Amelia read on the rug upstairs with her feet propped against the couch, I would turn the Kenwood to the low bands and let the static whisper along the edge of audibility. There's a comfort in white noise that's hard to explain if you never needed it. It's not silence. It's the proof that the world is still talking even when it has nothing to say. I kept a drawer for the things that mattered too much to leave in the open. Every mother knows that drawer. Birth certificate. The photo from the school picture day where the flash caught her eyes just right. A copy of the immunization card in case someone lost the original. Stray Polaroids from birthdays where the cake leaned and the frosting slid, but nobody cared. I had written our address and the words "in case of fire" on the top of a manila envelope and tucked it under the stack. I had even written out a list of what I'd grab if we ever had 10 seconds: the envelope, the charm bracelet, the sketchbook, the external hard drive that carried the only copies of our scanned photographs. You make lists like that in mountain towns even if you never show anyone. It's not fear, it's respect. If the town had a fault, it lay in how kindly it believed its own stories. The school board liked to say we were a community that shows up. The church bulletin always had a casserole sign-up that filled in fast. When spring runoff swelled the creek too high, men in Carhartt jackets anchored sandbags while women brought coffee that tasted like it had been cooked on a tractor. We were good at emergencies that made sense. Trees down roads blocked roofs leaking. The other kind, the kind that starts with a tone in the middle of the night, or a child calling from a place she should never be, hadn't come to our door yet. Or that's what I told myself back then. The first hairline crack in that old safe rhythm didn't look like anything tragic. It was a late September evening, the sort that slides from gold to blue before you realize you need a sweater. I was fixing the lamp over the sink, bad socket, cheap cord, while Amelia sat at the table mapping constellations for science. She used a ruler and a flashlight connecting dots she'd pricked in a piece of cardstock so the stars would glow when we backed it with paper. The oven was a steady 350, and the chicken made the house smell like thyme. When the porch sensor flicked on, we both glanced toward the window, expecting a neighbor or a raccoon. No movement. The light stayed on, shining across an empty step, and the weather vane shaped like a trout that never pointed the way it should. I told myself it was wind. Then I noticed how still the trees had gone. Wind speaks in this valley, even when it's pretending not to. That night it held its breath. 2 days later, I had a job out on County Road 12, replacing fluorescents in a feed store that stocked dog food in 50-pound sacks and sold salt blocks as big as suitcases. On the way home, I saw a government truck parked at the turnoff to the old service road, pale green with a small emblem I couldn't place. 2 men in hard hats stood by the collapsed wire fence that has been rusting down there since before we moved in, pointing into the trees with a clipboard between them. The area beyond that fence had been closed for ecological restoration since the 90s. At least that's what the signs said, though the signs had faded to the color of dead leaves. I slowed long enough for the man with the clipboard to look up. He nodded like we were both on our way somewhere important and stepped back from the gate. That night, my sister called and let it ring twice before hanging up. She does that when she's too tired to chat but wants to check the pulse of the world. I texted her a photo of Amelia holding the constellation card over a lamp so the punctures lit like little towns. Maya sent back a heart and a single line. "Check your ground loop buzz in your last recording." I smiled. Even from Denver, she could hear electricity misbehaving. Life was steady enough that week to make what came after feel like someone had swapped our house for an exact shadow of it. On Friday, I left a loaf of banana bread on Murphy's back counter for the staff because Trish's husband had been in the hospital with a stubborn pneumonia, and the girl at the register refused my cash with a thank you that sounded more like a prayer. On Saturday, Amelia and I walked the loop to the creek. The air smelled like wet mineral and pine pitch. A jay scolded us from a branch above the footbridge as if we'd offended the river. She tucked a strip of blue ribbon into a low fir right at elbow height and told me that would be our marker the next time the snow got too deep to see our own footprints. "I don't want to come back and not know where I'm going," she said. I told her I would be with her. She grinned and said that was the point of markers, you leave them even if you think you'll never get lost. On Sunday, the clouds came early. A thin sheet at first, then layers gray on gray pulled tight across the spine of the ridge. The air had that copper tang that says lightning isn't far. I checked the sump pump in the basement and moved the cardboard boxes off the floor to the metal shelf I use when the ground goes spongy. The Kenwood's cabinet had been cleaned that morning. I'd spent an hour polishing the faceplate because the sun through the window showed every fingerprint like a confession. I left the radio unplugged to let the cloth-covered cord cool all the way I was taught back when we still fixed things because we loved the way fixing sounded. Around sunset, the temperature dipped faster than it should 10 degrees in an hour, from 62 down to 52, and the porch light came on again by itself. This time, I watched it hold steady over the empty steps as the first drop of rain hit the mailbox and made a sound like a nickel tossed onto a tabletop. I opened the front door to test the sensor. No moths, no motion. Just the stillness you get when the weather changes its mind and decides to make a point. Inside, Amelia had set her charm bracelet in the center of the kitchen table like a decoration, the 3 little pieces catching whatever light the storm allowed. "You left this out," I said, and she shrugged, said she wanted to see it shine. We ate simple chicken and salad, 2 rolls I warned her to save but knew she wouldn't. She rinsed plates. I wiped the counter, and when she laughed at something small I can't remember. Now the sound bounced off the cabinets and made the house feel full in the way that makes mothers lean against a doorway and think they finally got one thing right. At 9, I told her to set out her jacket and boots because the forecast said the storm would drop fast in the night, and I didn't want her leaving in just a sweater if the bus came late. She rolled her eyes, she was 13 after all, and laid the jacket across the back of a chair like a truce flag. I checked the back door, locked the front, and turned the Kenwood's plug around in my hand like a coin. Plug it in. Leave it be. Habit 1. I set it gently back on the shelf. By 10, the rain had found its rhythm steady and hard enough to speak over. I made cocoa and left the mug on the counter for the morning because cocoa tastes better when the kitchen remembers you asked for comfort the night before. I walked the hallway, turned off lamps, and paused at Amelia's doorway. She had fallen asleep reading the book tented against her chest, one ankle crooked over the other, the charm bracelet on the nail by the bed glinting whenever lightning flashed. I eased the book away, marked her place with a receipt, and pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. She made a sound I've known since she was an infant, a little half sigh that says the world is as it should be. Downstairs, I checked the basement one last time. No seep at the concrete seam yet, just the damp breath you get before a real rain commits. I stood a moment in the dim, listening for the house. The low hum of the fridge through the floor. Joists the slow tick of cooling pipes, the rain thinning and thickening on the bulkhead door. When I killed the pull chain light, the dark settled like a blanket. I could feel the Kenwood there to my left on the shelf, patient as an old dog waiting to be called. I went upstairs, set my phone on the nightstand, and left the porch light on the way my mother taught me to show the road home its edges in case someone you love needed the lane. Around here, that little pool of light is a promise you make without words. The storm rattled the eaves, then eased. I lay awake longer than usual, listening for the small noises that tell you everyone is where they should be. By midnight, the wind died. The rain paused as if drawing breath. The porch light burned on, casting a pale square across the wet steps and the dark yard beyond. I waited for a call that didn't come. Somewhere down in the earth beneath our house, the sump clicked once and then went quiet. The clock on my dresser took a second longer than it should between digits, and the night steady, ordinary, trustworthy stretched one beat too far. The morning after that storm, the air felt scrubbed clean. You could smell pine resin sharp in the wind, and the puddles on our gravel drive were still wearing thin sheets of ice that cracked under my boots. I'd slept less than 2 hours, that kind of half-sleep where your body's still waiting for the next crash of thunder that never comes. The house was too still even for early fall. I remember standing at the kitchen counter watching steam rise from my coffee and realizing the porch light had burned all night again. I almost went out to change the bulb, but the phone on the counter vibrated before I could. It was Maya, one short text. Driving up. Don't make me regret this. No greeting, no explanation. Just that. I stared at the message for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. She showed up around 10, same beat-up Jeep, mud caked halfway up the doors, one of her boots unlaced, like she'd been too impatient to finish tying it. She didn't even bother knocking, just pushed the door open with her shoulder and called down the stairs. You better not have dragged me here for another ghost frequency. I told her to come down and see for herself. The basement smelled like solder and damp carpet, same as always. The Kenwood sat on the bench, a little green light glowing steady, and the cassette deck beside it still spun with that soft mechanical whir you only hear when something's recording nothing. I didn't say a word. I just pressed play. A hiss, a pop, then that fragile voice barely threading through the static channel 19. 245. Do you hear me, Mom? Can you still hear me? The room went smaller somehow. Maya didn't move, didn't blink. When it looped again, she finally said, quiet, Where'd you get this? I pointed at the Kenwood. She crouched beside it, fingers tracing the dial like she was checking a pulse. Was the channel open? She asked. I nodded. 19's a trucker band. You shouldn't be picking that up on this set. She pulled her laptop from her pack, unspooled a coil of cable, and said, Let's see what kind of ghosts we're chasing. For 2 hours, she worked the only sound, her keyboard tapping and the soft grind of the storm gutter still dripping outside. I sat at the workbench trying to read her face while she filtered and looped the file. Every so often, she'd glance at the waveform on her screen and mutter, That's not spliced. That's live. Finally, she leaned back, rubbed her eyes, and said, It's real. It's not a sample, not a hoax. Somebody broadcast this within the last 24 hours. My stomach went hollow. I asked what she meant by somebody. She tapped a key, and the screen filled with blue bands of sound. In the voice, I asked. She didn't answer right away, just turned the laptop so I could see a comparison chart. It's an 89% match, she said. To the last voicemail, Amelia left you before she disappeared. I sat down hard. The metal chair legs screeched against the floor. For a long time, neither of us said a thing. The only sound was the faint hum from the radio, still tuned to static like it was breathing. When I finally looked up, Maya was already pacing, talking half to herself. Channel 19, 245. Could be coordinates. Could be a frequency overlap. Or a location marker. I pointed to the old map of Copper Ridge hanging on the wall above my bench. 245 degrees west puts you right at the edge of the Echo Vale site. She froze. That place is off limits, she said. Government property since '94. They said they shut it down. I told her people say a lot of things when they want folks to stop asking questions. Maya had heard whispers about Echo Vale before something about sound experiments gone wrong, about soldiers who came back from testing unable to sleep without static in their ears. Urban legend, she said, but her voice didn't sound convinced. I reminded her that the last official transmission, logged out there before the facility closed, came through Channel 19. She stared at the floor for a moment, then grabbed her pack. "If we go," she said, "we go now. And if this turns out to be some kid messing with frequencies, I'm deleting your number." I told her fine. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't a prank. We packed light flashlights, a thermos, and every piece of radio gear Maya could carry. I took the tape, the notepad with the frequency scribbled on it, and Amelia's old charm bracelet, the one with the book, the cat, and the moon. We left just after noon. The highway west wound through pine and shale, the sky a dull pewter. The farther we drove, the fewer signs of life we saw. Gas stations gave way to boarded cabins, power lines to leaning poles without wire. By 2:30 we hit the old fence line, a mess of twisted metal and a sun-bleached warning sign barely hanging on a post. Maya killed the engine. "This is where the grid dies," she said. I reached for the radio in my lap, switched to Channel 19, and the speaker popped once, then whispered, "Don't stop. I'm here. Please." My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. Maya put a hand over mine. "Then let's find her." She drove on through the broken gate tires, crunching gravel. The silence inside those woods was unnatural. No birds, no wind, not even the buzz of insects. It was the kind of silence that makes you think of sealed rooms and things buried too deep. After 15 minutes, the road narrowed into what looked like a maintenance trail half-eaten by roots. We followed until the trees thinned and a collapsed watchtower came into view, its metal frame warped by fire. Maya cut the engine. The world held its breath. Then the radio on my lap crackled again. "Follow the wire. Mom, you're close." We both turned toward the sound. Along the ground, half hidden under needles, ran a thick cable snaking into the forest. We followed it, ducking under branches, the ground soft with moss and ash. Every 100 feet or so, something marked the path, a strip of faded ribbon, a piece of plastic tied to a twig, a child's toy ring looped around a root. They weren't random. Amelia used to do the same thing on our hikes. She called them breadcrumbs. I pointed at one tied to a bush. "She left these," I whispered. Maya just nodded, her jaw tight. The wire led us to a steel door set into the hillside, so disguised by vines it might as well have been part of the earth. The paint was almost gone, but I could still make out faint lettering. "Property of Echo Facilities 09. No entry." Maya brushed dirt off a dead keypad beside the frame. "No power," she said. I laid my palm against the metal. It was warm. She gave me a look. That shouldn't be possible. She dug a small toolkit from her pack, clipped a bypass wire, and got to work. 30 minutes later, a magnetic lock clicked. "Door remembers how to open," she muttered. I pulled it slowly, hinges groaning. The air that came out was heavy and stale, like a basement that's been holding its breath for decades. Our flashlights cut a narrow tunnel of light down a concrete stairwell. The steps echoed under us, each one a hollow sound, swallowed by the dark. At the bottom, the hallway opened into what used to be a laboratory, walls lined with broken panels, empty mounts where lights had once hung. The signs on the wall were still legible in places: Observation Room A, Sound Stage 2. Maya checked her scanner. "Signal's stronger," she said. We walked past a row of glass windows shattered from the inside. Something had been painted on the far wall in marker, faded, but still visible under the beam. They told me the sky was dead. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Mom, come get me." My throat closed. I ran my fingers over the writing. The marker had bled into the concrete, weathered but human. Maya whispered. She was here. At the end of the hall, we found a steel door cracked open just enough for our light to slip through. Inside was a circular chamber lined with ruined equipment. In the center, a glass booth sat half collapsed, the straps of a chair still hanging loose. A cassette recorder blinked faintly on the desk in front of it, a red light pulsing like a heartbeat. I hit play. A male voice, clinical and flat, filled the room. Test begins at frequency 245. Tone drop initiates false memory overlay. Subject will call for maternal figure. This is normal. The tape clicked off. My knees went weak. Maya stared at the deck. They were using voices, she said, conditioning with sound. Before I could answer, the portable tuner in her hand flared to life. A girl's voice, faint but clear, spilled out. I waited. I stayed quiet like you said. You promised you'd come. I dropped to my knees. It's her, I whispered. Maya ran to a dusty control terminal against the far wall. The screen flickered to life after a moment, lines of code rolling past before freezing on a folder labeled Subject 7, AK. My hand covered my mouth. She opened it. Audio logs, video fragments, progress notes. The last file was dated yesterday. The signal that brought us here. Maya said softly, didn't come from this room. It bounced through it. There's another site. She pointed to a string of coordinates at the bottom of the log. I wrote them down without thinking. 6 miles northeast, still inside the perimeter. She looked up from her tablet. If she's alive, that's where she is. When we climbed back out, the day had already gone pale. The storm had cleared, leaving a sky the color of tin. I could feel the weight of that place clinging to my clothes, a kind of residue you can't wash out. Maya loaded the gear into the Jeep and started plotting the coordinates. I sat in the passenger seat holding the bracelet in my palm thumb, tracing the tiny moon charm. For the first time in 12 years, I had something more than hope. I had direction. As we started the engine, the radio flared again, one clean tone, long and low, followed by a whisper. Mom. Hurry. Maya looked at me, and I could see the same question in her eyes that I was too afraid to say aloud. What if the signal wasn't calling us to her? What if it was calling us into the same place that took her? She shifted into gear, gravel crunching under the tires as we turned back toward the ridge. Behind us, the facility door hung half open, breathing out that cold metallic air as if something down there had just exhaled. Ahead, the road narrowed into the trees, and the signal on the dashboard scanner began to pulse again, faint, rhythmic, alive. I told Maya to keep driving. I didn't care what waited 6 miles ahead. My daughter's voice had broken through 12 years of silence, and whatever had learned to speak through her was waiting for us to answer. The road turned rough after the 2nd mile, more like a dried riverbed than a trail. The Jeep pitched and groaned as we climbed through the narrowing valley, the trees closing in tight enough to scrape both mirrors. I kept the radio balanced on my knees, its faint pulse ticking through the static like a heartbeat I couldn't afford to lose. Every minute or so the signal would fade, then come back stronger, almost like it was breathing with us. By the time the GPS lost its mind and started spinning, Maya slowed the Jeep to a crawl and said, "This is it." The woods on either side were so dense that daylight looked painted on in streaks, and the smell of wet moss and burnt metal hung low to the ground. The signal was louder now. I didn't even need to hold the tuner to my ear to hear her voice anymore, just a single word broken, carried through a blanket of static. Close. We parked near what looked like the remains of an old foundation half swallowed by vines. There were no birds, no sound of water, no wind. The quiet had a weight to it. Maya reached for her flashlight and handed me another. "We stay in line," she said. "If I lose sight of you, I stop. You do the same." I nodded, even though I already knew I wasn't letting her walk 10 feet ahead. The cable we'd followed earlier had disappeared under soil somewhere behind us, but the readings on her tablet still flickered green, pointing northeast toward a rise in the ground. The signal's frequency shifted just a few decimals, but enough that the small screen on my tuner began to glow faintly. I tightened my grip. The climb wasn't long, but it felt endless. Every step sank into damp earth. Every breath tasted of iron. At the top, the ridge broke open into a clearing no bigger than a basketball court. A collapsed concrete structure sat in the center, its roof caved inward, rebar jutting out like ribs. Maya scanned the edges with her light, then stopped. There she whispered. I followed her beam to the far side of the ruin. A stairwell descended into shadow. The steps cracked, but mostly intact. Next to it, nailed to a rotted post, was a strip of cloth, blue and frayed, tied in a knot I recognized immediately. Amelia's hiking ribbons. I felt my knees go soft. She's been here, I said. Maya didn't answer. She was already checking her sidearm, the old revolver she called her insurance policy. I took one last look at the trees, memorizing where the jeep sat between the trunks, then followed her down. The stairwell dropped deeper than it looked 30, maybe 40 feet. The air changed halfway down cooler, but heavy with that same metallic tang we'd smelled at the first bunker. My flashlight beam caught the edge of a rusted sign bolted to the wall, Site B. Memory containment. The letters had bled with rust, but were still legible. Maya muttered, "This wasn't on any map." The last step landed on solid concrete. Ahead of us, a narrow hallway stretched forward walls lined with conduit and half-dead lights flickering orange. Somewhere deeper, something hummed a low, steady tone that felt more like vibration than sound. I could feel it in my teeth. We moved slow flashlights low. The first door on the left hung open to what looked like an office. Papers, moldy and torn, carpeted the floor. A calendar still clung to the wall, March 2002, with the last 3 days crossed out in red marker. On the desk sat a cracked mug and a small cassette recorder, its plastic warped with age. Maya wiped it clean with her sleeve and hit play. For a second, nothing. Then a man's voice, weary, deliberate, containment compromised. Subject vocal loops remain active. Recommend full lockout of chamber 3. The tape clicked off. Maya exhaled. Containment of what she said. I didn't answer. I just wanted to keep moving. The hallway turned sharply right. The hum grew louder. On the wall, hand-scrawled in what looked like crayon, someone had written, "If the tone drops, don't speak." I stopped reading when my light hit something silver tied to a pipe. A bracelet. It took me a second to recognize it, but once I did, the room tilted. The moon charm was missing, but the little book and cat still hung by thin loops of wire. Amelia's. I reached for it with both hands and held it like something that could dissolve in air. Maya touched my shoulder, voice soft. We're on the right path. She didn't say anything about the part that scared both of us. If we were on her path, it meant she'd walked through all of this alone. The corridor ended at a reinforced door, heavy and solid, but unlocked. When I pulled, the hinges screamed. The room beyond was small, no bigger than a motel room, but clean in a way that didn't make sense. The floor swept the shelves, organized. A single cot sat against the far wall with folded blankets, and next to it a desk covered in notebooks, stacked like library returns. The air smelled faintly of soap and metal. A radio sat on the desk, its dial frozen at 245,000 kilohertz. I moved closer. On the bed, a notebook lay open. My light caught the handwriting, uneven, rushed, but painfully familiar. The first line read, "They said the sky burned, but I still see the moon." My throat closed. I flipped a few pages ahead. "If you find this, then I was right. You're real. Don't stop. I can hear you too." I must have been whispering because I felt Maya's hand on my arm again. "Lena," she said. "Look at this." She was pointing toward a small alcove behind the cot. Inside, an open metal cabinet stood half empty, lined with cassette tapes, hundreds of them, each labeled in marker, subject 7 day 1, day 4000, day 4129. She pulled one at random, slid it into her handheld player, and pressed play. A young girl's voice filled the room. tired, slurred, but unmistakable. Today I dreamed of our house. The pink chair was there. The neighbor's dog barked. Then the sound came back. The sound that tells me to forget. My hand went to my mouth. "It's her," I whispered. Before I could process what I was hearing, Maya froze, her head tilted toward the corner vent. "Do you hear that?" At first I thought it was feedback. Then I caught it, the soft rhythm of breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from inside the ventilation shaft. We stood still, flashlights trained on the vent, and then a voice so faint I almost believed it was a trick of the air, whispered Mom. I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the metal. "Amelia," I said, trying not to raise my voice. There was a pause, a rustle of fabric, then again, clearer this time. "You sound like her." I swallowed hard. "It is me. It's Mom. I'm here." Another long silence, then a small, broken reply. "They said you were gone, that the world ended." My hand shook against the vent. "They lied, sweetheart. None of that's real. I'm right here." Maya was already sweeping her flashlight across the walls, looking for a panel or door that connected to the vent. "She's close," she said. "Probably another room down below or behind the next corridor." She found a loose panel behind a rusted shelf and started pulling. The metal groaned. Dust poured out. Behind it, a crawl space opened barely wide enough for one of us at a time. She went first, flashlight between her teeth. I followed on hands and knees, the smell of rust and dirt thick in my throat. After what felt like 20 feet, the space widened into another hall lit by red emergency lights. The air was different here, moist, warmer, laced with something faintly sweet like antiseptic. 3 doors lined the corridor. One was sealed, one hung half open, and the third had a name scratched into it with something sharp. "Amelia." Maya pointed toward the open one. "Movement," she whispered. We stepped inside. The beam of her light fell on a shape in the far corner, a girl, thin knees pulled to her chest hair, long and matted. She squinted against the light, flinching like an animal. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then I said her name. Amelia. She lifted her head, eyes glassy in the red light, face gaunt but recognizable in a way that tore through me. Same hazel eyes, same faint dimple on her chin. But the voice that came out was unsure, rehearsed. "No, you're not real. You're one of the sounds." I took a step forward, hands raised. "No, baby, I'm real. It's me." She shook her head hard, arms tightening around her knees. "They send you when I try to remember. You're part of the test." My throat tightened. "Then tell me something they couldn't know I said softly. When you were 6, you fell from the pear tree and broke your arm. I carried you to the car even though I twisted my ankle. You said I caught you anyway." Her body went still. Then slowly she looked up. Tears filled her eyes. "You remember that?" I nodded, the tears coming before I could stop them. She reached out, one trembling hand touched my cheek, then gasped. "You're warm." I crossed the room and pulled her into my arms. She was shaking so hard I could feel her heartbeat against my ribs. Maya's voice came low from behind me. "We need to move. No cameras working here, but this place might not stay quiet long." Amelia looked from her to me, eyes wide. "Are the watchers gone?" she asked. I brushed her hair back. "There's no one here but us." We wrapped her in a blanket from the cot, and she clung to my hand like a child half her age. We made it as far as the hallway before she froze, body locking up like she'd hit a wall. The tone, she whispered, "It's back." Before we could ask what she meant, the radio clipped to my belt crackled to life with a piercing low tone, long rhythmic pulsing through the walls. Amelia dropped to her knees, hands over her ears, screaming. Maya ripped the batteries out, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming from the building itself, through the pipes and vents, through the floor. Forget, 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 Amelia shouted over and over. I dropped beside her, grabbed her face in both hands. Look at me. Listen to my voice. Not the tone, mine. She was slipping away, her eyes glassy and unfocused. I did the only thing I could think of. I started to sing. The same lullaby I used to hum when she was sick, the one about rabbits and the moon. It took less than a minute for her body to soften. The tone cut out like a switch had been thrown. Silence filled the corridor again. She blinked slowly, then whispered, I remember. I held her against me, rocking her like I used to when she was small until the tremors stopped. Maya crouched beside us, hand on my shoulder, her face pale. We have to get her out, she said. I nodded. We moved fast after that through the tunnel back up the stairs into the cold night. The stars were sharp above the ridge, no wind, no sound except the crunch of our boots on gravel. By the time we reached the jeep, the horizon had begun to pale with the first trace of dawn. Amelia lay in the back seat wrapped in blankets, her eyes darting toward the window every few seconds like she expected the forest to reach in after her. Maya drove hands tight on the wheel, and I sat beside my daughter holding her hand. For the first time in 12 years, I felt the weight of her pulse under my fingers. I didn't know how long she'd last, or what that place had done to her, but I knew this much: she was real alive, and whatever had taken her still had a voice in the dark. As we drove toward the fading lights of Copper Ridge, the radio on the dash flickered, once caught a fragment of static, and then a whisper so faint it could have been wind. You found one. How many more will follow? Maya looked at me, eyes wide, but I didn't answer. I just reached forward, switched the radio off, and kept my hand wrapped tight around Amelia's. We didn't speak again until the town lights appeared through the trees, and even then the silence between us felt alive, like something that hadn't finished breathing. By the time we reached the edge of town, the sun was just beginning to rise, a pale light breaking through the clouds like something the night had been trying to hide. Amelia slept in the back seat, her face half buried under the blanket, breathing shallow but steady. I couldn't stop turning around to look at her, as if my eyes were the only thing keeping her real. Maya drove both hands tight on the wheel, jaw clenched in the way it gets when her mind's moving faster than her words. The radio stayed off, but the silence between us wasn't peace. It felt like the kind of quiet that comes after an explosion, air still vibrating sound burned out. When the first gas station came into view, Maya pulled in and cut the engine. We can't take her to the hospital, she said finally. Not yet. Too many questions. I nodded. I already knew who we needed: Detective Rosenthal, the only man who hadn't called me crazy when I swore Amelia hadn't just run away. He lived out by the reservoir, now retired and half forgotten by the department. His house sat back from the road, paint peeling in long curls, one of those places that looked like it had grown tired of standing upright. When he opened the door, he looked older than I remembered. Beard gone to silver eyes sunken but still sharp. He saw Amelia behind me and dropped the mug he was holding. It hit the floor and rolled once before shattering. Christ, he said under his breath. I told him we needed to talk somewhere private. Inside, the air smelled like dust and wood smoke. He led us to the kitchen table and just stood there for a minute staring at her like he couldn't trust what his eyes were telling him. Amelia kept close to me, quiet, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. When I finally started talking, the words felt clumsy, too big for the air. I told him about the voice on the radio, the coordinates, the facility under the ridge, the room, the tapes. Maya filled in the technical pieces, what she'd found on the equipment, the way the tones weren't just signals, they were triggers. Rosenthal listened without interrupting, only nodding every so often. When I mentioned Echo Vale, something flickered in his eyes. He got up, walked into a back room, and came out with an old metal lockbox. I kept what they told me to destroy, he said. The lid creaked open, revealing files yellowed at the edges, photographs, maps. He laid one folder flat on the table, its tab marked Project Hollow in fading type. He rubbed his thumb over the name, then started to explain. In the early 90s, a contractor called Therich had leased land near Copper Ridge under the guise of sonic research studies on sound exposure and cognition. Officially, it was for PTSD therapy. Unofficially, it was about control. They discovered that certain low-frequency tones could elicit specific emotional responses: fear, calm, obedience, especially in developing brains. When the experiments went bad, the company was absorbed by a defense firm. The site sealed off. He sighed. I filed your girl's case for years, Lena. I had a feeling it tied back, but no proof. They buried this deep. I looked down at Amelia's hands, small and pale against the table. They didn't just test her, I said. They trained her. Rosenthal's eyes moved between us. You're saying she remembers? Maya nodded. Not everything, but enough. Someone kept the project alive. The transmissions we caught were recent. He flipped through another folder, pulling out a photo of 3 children, black and white faces blurred by age. She wasn't the only one, he said quietly. 3 others vanished between 2008 and 2014. Similar backgrounds. All unsolved. He slid the photo across the table. The girl on the far left wore a jacket with the same embroidered patch I'd seen in one of the facility hallways. A white circle split by a tone wave. It took me a long moment to speak. If this isn't over, they'll come for her again. Rosenthal nodded. Then we go where they started. That afternoon, he led us out to a row of warehouses near the old train yard. No signs, no company logos, just a strip of glass doors clouded by dust. The faded letters on one read Pro-N Communications. Inside, everything was coated with years of neglect paper curled with damp chairs overturned. But the smell told me the truth. The air wasn't old. Someone had been here recently. Maya found a breaker panel in the back and threw it on. Half the lights buzzed to life. Rows of small soundproof booths lined one wall, windows fogged but intact. On a desk inside one of them, an old computer tower hummed softly, its power light glowing green. She booted it up, worked through a tangle of corrupted directories until one file caught her eye. Hollow Residual Protocol. She clicked it open. Lines of text scrolled up the screen like a report mid-transmission. If a subject is recovered prematurely, it read, Initiate residual sequence. Embedded tones will self-reinforce. Subject will experience disorientation, paranoia, and cognitive decay without re-exposure. Maya leaned back, whispering, It's a kill switch. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. You're saying they built her to break if she got out? Exactly, she said. Unless we can rewrite the loop. Amelia stood in the doorway, watching her face unreadable. Then quietly she said, You sang. I turned toward her. At the bunker, when the sound came. You sang, and it stopped. Maya blinked. She's right. Sound can cancel sound. I could see her mind working, piecing it together. If those tones shape emotional memory, a counter-frequency might unravel it. Rosenthal glanced at me. You think you can reverse 12 years of conditioning with a song I didn't answer? I just reached for Amelia's hand. It worked once. We left the warehouse with a copy of the files and the sinking understanding that someone out there still held the other end of the signal. Back in town, we checked into a small private clinic Rosenthal trusted. The doctor on call, a trauma specialist named Nielsen, agreed to keep Amelia under observation without reporting her case. She's malnourished anemic, he said, looking over the charts, but her vitals are strong. The rest, that's not my department. He meant her mind. Amelia hardly spoke the first night, only hummed softly when she thought we weren't listening. Small fragments of melody broken like glass in her throat. 2 days later, Maya showed up with someone else. a tall, bearded man, mid-60s, carrying an old reel-to-reel recorder under one arm. His name was Boone Mallister. He'd been the lead audio engineer for Therich before the project shut down. When he saw Amelia through the glass partition, he went pale. "She survived," he whispered. I wanted to hit him and thank him in the same breath. He said he'd left the company when they turned their work toward weaponization, but others, his words, kept the faith. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal case. Inside was a cassette labeled Resonance Breaker. He'd designed it as a fail-safe, a tone meant to dismantle conditioned responses. It was never tested, he warned. It could help her, or erase everything. We played it in the neurotherapy suite under controlled volume, Boone monitoring the spectrum, Maya recording the feedback. The sound was barely audible, a shimmer almost like wind over glass. Amelia sat still, eyes closed. After less than a minute, tears began to run down her face. She reached for my hand. "I see home," she said. "Our porch. The light." Boone froze. "It's working," he whispered. But even as relief hit me, I noticed something else, the hospital lights flickering in rhythm with the tone. A nurse outside glanced up, confused. Maya looked at her laptop. "We've got interference. Something's hijacking the frequency." Within seconds, the intercom system crackled alive. A low pulse, identical to the one from the bunker, seeped through the speakers. Boone swore under his breath. "They're still broadcasting." He yanked the plug from the wall, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming through the building's infrastructure, wired in at the foundation. Amelia dropped to the floor, clutching her ears. "They're trying to put me back," she cried. I wrapped my arms around her, shouting over the noise. "Listen to me." Not them. My voice. I started to hum again, that same lullaby, desperate and shaking. Boone tore open a wall panel and found a hidden speaker array wired into the hospital's comm line. "It's not theirs," he said. "It's built into this place." When the tone finally died, the air felt scorched like the aftermath of lightning. Amelia slumped against me, exhausted but conscious. Nielsen came in pale and shaking, asking if we'd triggered an alarm. Maya handed him one of the wires Boone had pulled from the wall, thin, unmarked, but humming faintly with residual current. "This hospital was retrofitted 4 years ago," she said. "Same year. Therich changed its name to Valence Behavioral Institute. Rosenthal arrived not long after, his face ashen. They never stopped," he said. "They just changed the letterhead." That night, none of us slept. Boone sat by the window with the recorder on his lap, replaying fragments of the resonance breaker, making adjustments in pencil on a pad. Maya cross-referenced the broadcast nodes from the files we'd taken. Everything pointed back to a single location, the original command center deep under Echo Vale. Site 0, the place where the first signal was born. I remember the way the light from the parking lot drew long shadows across the floor, and how for the first time in 12 years the fear I felt wasn't about losing Amelia. It was about what else might still be down there waiting for us. When dawn came, the sky over the ridge glowed the faintest pink, and Amelia, half awake, whispered something that made my blood run cold. "I know where the center is," she said. "I was there once." The man with no face told me the sky had to end before the sound could stop. I turned toward her, but her eyes were already closing again, lost to sleep. Boone looked up from his notes. "Then she's the key," he said quietly. "The system's tied to her. If she remembers where it began, she can help us end it." Maya met my eyes, and if she can't, I looked down at my daughter, her face still pale in the morning light. Then we ended for her. We didn't say anything else after that. Outside, the wind started up again, whispering through the trees in a tone that almost sounded like static. It was faint, but enough to make us all look toward the hills at the same time. Boone shut off the recorder. "They know she's awake," he said. I kept my hand over Amelia's and whispered, "Then let them hear me too." The words felt heavy in my mouth, like the start of something we couldn't turn back from. The next step was already decided. We were going back to where it started to shut it down for good. We left at dawn. The air was thin and sharp, the kind that cuts through layers no matter how many you wear. The ridge looked almost calm from a distance, brushed with early snow. But every one of us knew what waited underneath it. Boone had mapped the last coordinates from Amelia's memory, and Maya had built a modified transmitter to carry his counter-frequency. Rosenthal came along even though his knees made every step a struggle. He said he'd started this once and he wanted to see it finished. I didn't argue. There was nothing left to lose. The drive to Echo Vale was quiet. No music, no chatter, just the hum of tires and the wind clawing at the sides of the Jeep. Amelia sat between Maya and me, her eyes on the tree line, hands folded like she was praying without sound. She hadn't spoken much since the hospital. Sometimes she'd start humming little notes from the lullaby, soft enough that only I could hear them. It was how I knew she was still there, still tethered to the world. When the road ended, we parked where the old fence had rusted into the ground. The same gate that had swallowed her 12 years ago stood open like a mouth. Boone checked his recorder, adjusted the dials, and said, "If we're right, this will sync with their core system. If we're wrong..." He didn't finish the sentence. Rosenthal gripped the strap of his bag and muttered, "Then it ends here anyway." The walk to Site Zero took almost an hour. Snow crunched underfoot and the woods were so quiet I could hear my own pulse. The entrance was a narrow cut in the hillside, half hidden behind fallen rock. Boone and Maya cleared it with a crowbar enough for us to slip through one by one. The smell hit first metal mold and something faintly electric like air after a lightning strike. My flashlight beam caught the tunnel ahead. The concrete walls were damp and breathing steam. Somewhere below, the tone had already started a faint hum, rising and falling in perfect rhythm like it was alive. The corridors branched like arteries. The deeper we went, the warmer it got. Cables ran along the walls, pulsing faintly with light, leading us to a large chamber at the bottom. It looked almost ceremonial metal catwalks spiraling around a circular pit, the walls covered in old monitors, many still flickering with static. In the center stood a chair strapped to a network of wires feeding into the floor. Boone's eyes widened. "That's it," he said. "The cradle. It's built to amplify a live subject." He moved fast, setting the recorder on a control table and spooling wire toward the hub. Maya helped fingers steady even as her voice trembled. "We trigger this breaker through the core. The feedback should collapse the signal matrix." Amelia stepped closer to the chair. Her breath fogged the air. "That's where they made me sit," she whispered. I caught her hand before she could move any closer. "You don't have to go near it," I said. She shook her head. "I do. It remembers me." We didn't have time to argue. The hum thickened, turning into vibration under our feet. The lights on the monitors shifted from static to patterned black bars pulsing in sync with the tone. Boone shouted over the noise. "It's booting itself. Something's remote triggering the system." He looked at me, face pale. "She's the key, Lena. It's locked onto her frequency." Amelia took a step forward, her voice calm in a way that scared me more than panic ever could. "It wants to finish what it started. Let me end it." Boone shook his head. "You don't understand. If you sync with it, it could pull you under again." She turned to me. "You sang once. You broke it. You can do it again. But it has to start with me." I wanted to tell her no, to grab her and run. But I saw something in her face, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. She climbed into the chair on her own hands, gripping the armrests. Boone's fingers flew across the controls, patching the resonance breaker into the system. Maya stood by the power regulator, waiting for his signal. I knelt beside my daughter, tucking her hair behind her ear. "You listen to me," I said. "Not the noise, not the voice, just me." She smiled faintly. "I always do." Boone gave the nod. Maya threw the switch. The first tone hit like a wave shaking the air. The lights flared, monitors flashing white. Amelia arched against the restraints, gasping, but didn't cry out. Boone adjusted the dials, his knuckles white. The breaker tone layered over the hum, a pure rising sound that cut straight through the noise. I started to sing again, voice trembling the same lullaby that had carried through every bad night of her childhood. The hum began to fracture. One by one, the monitors blew out, sparks falling like snow. Boone shouted something I couldn't hear. Maya was yelling too, trying to stabilize the levels, but all I could see was Amelia's face, eyes open, staring straight ahead. The floor buckled and a surge of light flooded the room, swallowing everything in white. For a second, it felt like the air itself split apart. Then silence. Absolute, perfect silence. When the light cleared, the hum was gone. The equipment lay dead smoke curling from the cables. Boone staggered to his knees, coughing. Maya's hands were bleeding from the glass, but she was smiling through tears. Rosenthal leaned against the wall, breathless, whispering, "It's over." I turned toward the chair. Amelia sat slumped forward, motionless. My heart stopped. I ran to her, grabbed her shoulders, called her name again and again, until she finally drew a long, shaky breath. Her eyes fluttered open. "It's quiet," she whispered. "Really quiet." We carried her out of there just as the first rumble rolled through the ground. The facility was collapsing, concrete cracking like thunder. Boone barely made it through the tunnel before the entrance sealed behind us. We stood in the snow, gasping, watching the hillside cave in, sending up a plume of dust and light. The sound never came back. The forest, for the first time in years, was still. In the weeks that followed, there were questions. Officials came, papers were filed, but the story never made it past a handful of reports. Rosenthal used his old connections to push the case into federal hands. Therich Valance, all their shells and aliases unraveled under investigation. Boone turned over every recording, every file he'd kept hidden. A few arrests were made, names I'd never heard, faces that looked too ordinary to belong to something that cruel. Most of them denied everything. A few didn't. They called it Project Hollow Termination, as if renaming the horror made it smaller. But the real evidence was gone, buried under that mountain. Amelia spent months recovering. The doctors said her memory would come and go, but she surprised them. Piece by piece, she began to remember not the experiments themselves, but the moments in between. She remembered drawing on the walls with a crayon someone had smuggled in. She remembered humming to herself to drown the tones out. She remembered my voice, faint and far away, singing through static when she thought she was alone. The day she told me that I cried harder than I had in 12 years. Maya moved back to Denver, teaching audio engineering at a small community college. She still calls once a week, always ending the conversation with "still quiet," and I always tell her yes. Boone disappeared for a while after the hearings, then sent a letter a few months later. No return address, just a single line. The silence means it worked. As for Rosenthal, he finally retired for good. When I visited him last spring, he was sitting on his porch, a blanket over his knees, looking out over the reservoir. "You did what we couldn't," he told me. "You brought someone back." I told him I wasn't sure I had. He smiled and said, "Then you did the best anyone could." Now, every morning Amelia and I walk the same loop trail behind our house, the one with the old footbridge she used to name the river stones from. She's 25 now, taller than I am, hair cut short. Sometimes she hums under her breath, sometimes she doesn't. When the wind moves through the pines, it sounds like static for half a heartbeat, and I see her glance toward me, waiting for a sign. I always smile and shake my head. "Just the wind," I say. She nods and keeps walking. There are nights when I still wake to silence so deep it feels wrong. I'll sit by the window with a cup of tea, listening for that hum that once ruled my life. It never comes. But sometimes if I leave the radio on, I swear I can still hear the faintest breath between the static, just air moving through memory, reminding me that even the worst things we build can be broken if someone refuses to stop listening. I've learned that healing doesn't sound like applause or headlines. It sounds like quiet. Like a porch light burning through a long night waiting for a car that finally makes it home. If this story stayed with you, share it not for views, but so no one's name gets lost to the dark.